Yes.
FBI.
Tommy, here we are again. Good to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah, we've been in touch through email, and then we had a couple chats earlier, one of which I shared publicly, and that got some nice response, including from some people whose opinions you would respect. So they were kind of encouraging you to pursue the path that you were sort of in the midst of laying out. You sent me some notes, and I think these were, well, I don't know how refined your notes were, or if they were more sort of like just getting things out of your head, or it's probably maybe somewhere in between the two. It's an interesting collection of ideas, and I asked you if I could pick 2 or 3 sentences to ask you to riff on.
Scared me to death.
Yes. And
Scared me to death.
I'm still kind of deciding as we talk, but I'm going to start. I'm actually going to use ... to connect 2 sentences. So I'm going to take a piece from sentences. All right, I'm going to cheat right from the start. All right, so here we go. 10 is the number of completion, and it's a specific instance where Lynch and Frost agree, though they use markedly different routes to get there. Say as little or as much as you want about that.
Okay. So much has been made of Lynch's philosophical, let's call it quasi-religious concepts. And as you know, as a lot of times as Twin Peaksians, as fans will do, peripheral fan media content creators will do, we'll get very knee deep into what Lynch is talking about, right? We have enough work with Lynch where we can superimpose other film concepts, other twist concepts onto Twin Peaks and try it out. I think that this is I think, my ideas are no exception. I think you can do that, and I think that works out great. Where I'm saying that, philosophically speaking, there's a point where the two of them can agree by getting there in completely different methodologies. I'm speaking more to what Frost is bringing to the table. Now, look, Carl Jung has come up on many different programs, podcasts, video series, and what have you. But one of the things that continues to occur, and why I aimed at 10 as the circular number of completion, how does that fit the philosophical framework of Mark Frost? And the answer to that, I think, is the mandala, right? So Carl Jung had this exercise where he would bring in his patients, and he would have them rather improvisationally create their own mandala. They would sit down, they'd make a circle, they would put something dead center in the middle. That thing, according to Carl Jung, would approximate the self. And then all of the imagery around that, all of the little shreds of who you are as a person, you would start to create symbolic representations of that as well. I think you can find the mandala several times. And I think what's happening is, from an unconscious perspective, this is a person who's reminding themselves that every single element of what we're watching is, in fact, an element of that person. And I think that that's why it comes back to circular symbols so often. It's not just the ring, not just the donuts, not just Glastonbury Grove. It's also the idea of completion. Completion as representing self, sure, but completion also as representative of a mandala, which is also representative of the various aspects of yourself, thus representing individuation and self, right? That's a limb, and I know that, and I know it's easy to walk out onto that limb, but we're given the notation of the numbers that add up to 10. We're given the explanation that this is representative of completion. And, Anthony, I like to take things to a narrative perspective. I think a lot of times, because it's so easy to get lost in the woods, and I love it. I love that, right? I'm a big fan of podcasts and media that want to do that. But I'm also, I'm a writer for a living. And so what I like to do is I like to ask myself, what's the narrative purpose of this? right? I think things like Carrie Page, I think sometimes that gets lost. We're so eager to go like representation, and me too, and I do it, and I love it. But I think sometimes we forget to ask what is the narrative that we're being presented with. So when you speak to completion, complete what? Complete person. That's what I think. That's what I think is going on. I think that we are all watching. Originally speaking, we're all watching the personal unconscious, right? And then the return represents the collective unconscious, trying to push through to the personal unconscious. And I think that when this person reaches individuation, as they travel to higher and higher forms of consciousness that represents a more true framework of their own reality, I believe that that's when that person will reach self. When they reach self, they're willing to deal with the traumas as they happened in their real life, and then they're ready to move on. There's a lot of people who are getting to that, but I think now one of the differences between what I'm speaking to and what I'm hearing from other folks, I think in an archetype sense, we actually deal with some of the frameworks that's going on in this person's mind. Not just that they are covering trauma. We physically and literally see the archetype of trauma with the face. Not just that they're dealing with a defense mechanism. We physically see a defense mechanism as represented as an archetype with a face. The same is true with repressions. We literally see repression in their face. And I think that all of that plays out mostly in the personal unconscious, but theoretically, I believe that most of the return happens in the collective unconscious, and that the dreamer's not even aware that that's happening whatsoever. So there you go. That's a lot. Okay. That's a lot of stuff, right? But but being a Twin Peaks fan, I'll watch the series 2 more times the next couple of weeks, and then I'll forget all of that and do it again.
So to summarize in 30 seconds or less, Lynch and Frost both approach 10 as the number of completion in different ways.
Yes.
15 seconds for each of them.
Lynch is using it more from from the Western version of numerology, right? So in the Westernized version of numerology, anything that's adding up to 10 represents completion. If it's around you in sort of a synchronicity event in your life, it's probably screaming to you about the need to be complete. Well, that happens to line up with Carl Jung because, well, he's studying that and he's trying to ask himself, why do people use those frameworks? What are they? What's the purpose of these symbols? Why do people continue to create them across cultures? And so Jung takes it back to a conscious perspective of, well, this plays out in your mind and you represent it through characters and the forms of modern media. And those characters that continue to speak to you in your personal unconscious about the number 10 are asking you, hey, you got work to do. You still got to combine and be a full person. It's 2 different frameworks to look at it because one is the believing and acceptance of numerology. The other is the study and the guide of numerology. Why is that happening? They're both questions, but they get to them in a very similar way. That's what. And
do you think Lynch is doing any like signifying the end of an era or signifying the end of a yuga or something like that?
Well, what's interesting about that, yes, I think very much so, right? I think Thorne hit that right on the head, but I believe that it's playing out in the personal unconscious in an archetypal way where, sure, the representation of that is there. The representation of lots of religious symbols and text are there. But I don't think that that's what's really happening, right? I think that the dreamer herself uses these frameworks that are sort of embedded inside of us. Because, if you look at what Carl Jung's talking about, he's talking about much like you have instincts. Archetypes are instincts. They're formless, faceless instincts that are already inside of you. Now, they're going to push themselves forward to your personal unconscious, where then they adopt a representative, something that might be current in media, something like an FBI agent, something that, or a superhero figure and a guy with a green glove, right? These archetypes will push themselves to this next level of consciousness, and then their representatives are asking you to take on a task. They're asking you to do something probably having to do with individuation, reintegration.
Okay,
Right?
so I'm gonna interrupt right there because individuation is a word I've heard many, many times. I have a feel for it, but can you kind of explain what you think it is?
In my limited songwriting brain, sure. Because no, I'm not, I'm by no means, I'm not a doctor. I just play one on TV. Right. I have no business. My Twin Peaks credibility is I have a library card. Thank you. Individuation it strikes me as a process, right? So the term itself, very clearly, when we reintegrate all of these various aspects from our shadows and all of the different archetypes, which are fascinating, by the way, dude. They're fascinating to read the archetypes that Carl Jung does address. And that they're, look, this science says there's an unlimited amount of archetypes. Have at it, kids. Now that you know the rules, go out and find them, right? But he does address several of them, and you can lay it right over the top of the media, and you can find the archetypes that he's talking about, and it plays out exactly the way that he says that it is. Anyway, to reintegrate all of these things is the process itself of individuation. So we'll use the process of taking all of our personality aspects, becoming one person, facing all of our repressions and our regressions and our traumas and whatever our shadow self is, which is not always the bad thing you think that it is. It just represents an opposite aspect of yourself, or an aspect of yourself that you don't really want to talk about. Sometimes that's not as bad as people think. Sometimes it's the person inside of you that's willing to listen to other people. You don't want to represent yourself as a person who's willing to listen. You want to represent yourself as tough. Well, that's a shadow aspect, right? So the process of individuation is to take all of those and then make them one thing. And what we're trying to obtain is the self. We're trying to obtain self with the capital S, right? All of those things combined will go on to make self. Now, mind you, I've got super big lingering questions, and that's like the reason why I want to do this show. It's an interesting take. I want to say, like, I'm not exactly certain what this is. So we'll all grab our books and we'll all think about, well, what might Frost have looked into regarding Carl Jung that would have made this aspect of the show true, right? And what's funny about that, Anthony, is that I find that the things that are more linear in terms of narrative, it's harder to ask, what does that mean? Because its narrative is already on paper. So what we all tend to do, right? We all tend to go, what's up with Cooper's imposed face, man? What's going on with that? And because of the nature of a scene like that, we can then impose our will onto it, right? All of us, me, everybody. When we talk about what's going on with the Martells, it's a different thing. If you're asking yourself, how does this work in a dream framework, a Jungian dream framework, no less, of which, basically goes back to a Freudian framework. How do you reconcile something as linear in its narrative as that? How do you reconcile why this is happening? You can get to the suggestion, well, this is the archetype of life as demonstrated by the 1980s soap opera. And that's probably true, right? Then it's reflected back at you through a shadow, an invitation to love, to tell you, yes, that's an archetype. And here's the shadow of said archetype, right? Which can also happen in the personal unconscious. But why? And those are the kind of questions when I ask, I want to study using this framework, and then I want to ask and answer those questions and accept other people's answers to those questions so that we can try to figure out what's going on with that. Anyway, that's individuation.
Okay. Thank you.
Ta-da!
Well, that word is in the next sentence that I'm going to read.
So wait.
And I'm going to cheat again by once again combining parts of two sentences. And so this might be a little bit out of context, but I'm going to read. Both, that's Lynch and Frost, are writing a story about individuation occurring in the personal unconscious as directed by the collective unconscious. And
Yes.
This is precisely why Cooper is an archetype and not the dreamer.
Right.
So feel free to riff on that for as long or as short as you want. I have probably about like 10 to 15 minutes before I got to run. So just a heads up. And I have one
Okay.
more sentence. I have one more sentence after this, if you're up for it.
Okay. Look, I'm just gonna say it flat out. Like, there are two major pieces to my personal theory, which, by the way, owes itself a lot to other people's work. I'm the guy on the other end of the screen reading, 25YL or listening to Blue Rose Task Force. Like, that's me. I'm that guy. And a lot of what I've come to, and then a lot of why I started to seek out Jung's work directly, owes itself to a lot of other people's theories, as I'm sure is true with a lot of folks. What I see Cooper as, and this is one of the things at the heart of my theory, Cooper is an archetype that has been manifest to put a face to a defense mechanism. This is why I think that Cooper, when he suffers bouts of white knightism, it's so blatant. It's not even very cognizant of itself when it happens, right? It's like he has a direct motive. He's got a specific and very singular reason to exist. I do not believe that in the personal unconscious, much like your dream, where everything that you interact with is autonomous and they seem to be able to do what they want, I do not believe that the characters of Twin Peaks have any idea that they're on a show that's called Twin Peaks. And I do very much think of it as a show that plays, right, with credits, possibly with the credits of the actors' name that are upon them, possibly with the faces of those actors inside of the show. I don't think that he's aware of that, but I do feel like he's an archetype of a specific thing in the 80s, and then it's explored outwardly where it goes beyond the boundaries of what that is. Now, I'll tell you in a weird way how I got to that. I got to that from the statement, "I am the FBI." Now, that happens in a completely different timeline, or not timeline proper, but in years later.
Mm-hmm.
But as the Richard character, and I'm looking at the update of what it would be to see the FBI, the law figure, that person on our media now. I'm looking at Cooper and thinking about the representation of buddy cop things that we had seen previous then. And I'm thinking to myself, that statement is the cool statement that you make when you're the authority and or cop and or action figure of your representative cinematic universe. That's the cool statement, right? That's the "I'll be back. Go ahead, make my day. I am the FBI." That's what that is. It's like he creates this statement not even realizing why he would speak in such a definitive tone, with such an out of bounds sort of thing to say in that moment. That got me to think, hey, listen, Cooper's job is to protect. First, it's to find, then it's to protect. Find Laura's killer, i.e. find Laura, find the pieces of what makes this person a whole thing, and then protect Laura, right? That leads me to believe that Cooper is the representative of a defense mechanism. He's got a very specific and singular job, and he projects that job over everyone else who comes into his periphery that he cares for, and he does it in a very unilateral way. And it seems that strikes me as the representation of your defense mechanism, which leads me to believe that Laura is the representation of trauma. She's the face of trauma, not necessarily either the dreamer, not at least this person we see in this context, right? We see her shadow. We all understand that. How is, and so you ask yourself from a narrative perspective, well, how is that happening? That's why I believe that Cooper is not the dreamer. I believe that Cooper is not the dreamer because he too is as confused as we all were when he recognized that the level of consciousness that he'd gone into by the very end of his ordeal was going to lead him back into a circular motion, that he didn't know where he was, like Jung suggests, in your personal unconscious, where and when have no bearing on reality. This is why your personal unconscious may manifest into strange events that seem to make no linear or common sense to you whatsoever. That seems to align perfectly with what's happening. Carrie Page, on the other hand, knows exactly what's going on, right? And of the two of them, if I'm presented with just a narrative context between the two of these people, who looks like they have a better understanding of this moment? Well, it's obvious who that is, and it's not Cooper. So I think that that's what we're looking at. Now, I do think we see a moment where Cooper comes into contact with the collective unconscious and recognizes that he has been manufactured for a purpose, for a thing, for specificity. But I don't think that he gets to hold on to that, because ultimately I think that he has a specific job. And I think that's what we come into contact with. And I think that when characters sort of become cognizant, I think that gets taken away from them, much like a dream. It's almost like you had this lucid dream where just for a fraction of a second, you knew this is way beyond the pale. This can't be happening. And then you're right back into the dream again. And then it is happening. Then it's totally, now you're flying over the top of a Dollar Tree. Who knows why, right?
Interesting.
It is. And it's elaborate. And I understand that, man. I understand that,
No, you're doing a great job under these time constraints that I have pressing down on me today. I do have about 5 more minutes.
Cool, man.
And obviously, there's so much more you could dig into, and that's the idea here, right? Just
let's hope. Let's hope I don't read something on Reddit within about 3 weeks of starting my show and just go, nope, I'm calling the show something else, and then
Well, it'll be a living thing.
It is a living thing.
So that would mean Cooper is not the dreamer, but he might be inside or a part of a dream. Or
100%. He's 100% part of the
My last sentence for you is, and take as much or as little of this as you want to elaborate on. And with that, the individuation is complete. The defense mechanism and the persona, masquerading as the face of trauma, go back into the consciousness, quote, waiting to be deployed. That would be something I would need a lot more explanation of for it to make sense.
That's the heart of my idea. That's the heart of my idea. Look, this is why I think that Carrie Page is more important than she gets credit for from a lot of people, if I'm right, and I reserve the right to be very wrong. And I reserve the right to stumble on somebody else's theory who crystallizes something for me, and I go, I love that. You know what I mean? Like I refuse to be sat in front of a fireplace someplace telling you what Twin Peaks is about for 7 hours. And
yeah, I'm gonna take just a moment. This is where I am lately, as far as like the rightness of a theory. If it really works for you, and like it works for your internal BS filter, and your internal BS filter is exposed to external commentary and other people pointing things out. Like if you really know, like, deep inside that something's working for you, then I would say that's as right as you're gonna get.
Yeah.
As far as like
as right as you're going to be
confirmed rightness. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
No. Dude, you're dead right. I do have this weird need to. I always try to go back and ask myself: is it possible that Frost could have thought this? Is it possible that Frost may have brought this up to Lynch? We know that Frost says, look, Lynch wants nothing to do with the philosophical aspect of things. Right. I mean, he said it. He blatantly told us that. He doesn't want to be bothered with the philosophy of it. So I know this is so silly, but like I've been a co-writer with people, artists and other folks for like 30 something years. I know what it's like when I'm dealing with an artist and I have to deal with their framework and what genres that they touch, what their fan base likes, that kind of thing. Right. Same thing like when I'm writing a song for like a film or even like an advertisement. So I have this framework. I know exactly where I'm allowed to be. I know like what'll sort of push buttons and whatnot, but I know what not to ask. If I want to insert something of my own artistic credibility or whatever you want to call it, I know how to do it in such a way where it sounds like I'm operating within their rules, and I don't really then have to talk about it. And I think a lot of what Frost goes through, if I had to guess, I mean, you know, that's a stratosphere like well above my pay grade. But I guess it's something like that, where when he comes up with different rules and different concepts, he already knows to play with inside of a specific headspace that's tolerable to Lynch. And I think that's why they don't really have to discuss what is the philosophy of it. Do I think that he knows the philosophy of it? Yes, absolutely. I absolutely think that Frost understands tooth and nail in advance. David Lynch may superimpose a philosophy on it later and go, oh, is that what I meant by that? Right? We've heard that. Frost, I don't believe that whatsoever. I think, you know, so when we talk about Carrie Page, when we talk about what's happening in the final moment of the show, what's cool is, dude, I don't think, for me, that's not the final moment. It's the moment you watch Carrie Page from a narrative concept and you go, what am I being presented? Why did you write this character? What's the purpose of that? Why this name? Why this word? What is happening? If I just accept it from a narrative structure, right? All the symbols that I'm being shown, everything that integrates within the show. Now let's watch the show. So that's what my wife and my wife, who's my co-host of the podcast, once it launches, it hasn't launched yet. She's still in the middle of making our graphic for us. That's what's behind me. I've created, you know, the music and stuff like that. In any event, we've gone back and now we're watching the show through the framework of what Carrie Page means to us. Now let's talk about your question about the process of individuation.
Yeah, I'm gonna read it again real quickly because
Sure.
and then probably about 3 or 4 minutes.
Cool.
And with that, individuation is complete. The defense mechanism and the persona masquerading as the face of trauma go back into consciousness, quote, waiting to be deployed.
Waiting to be deployed.
I don't know how
If
much
we were to
how far you want to go into it, right?
Yeah, no, it's cool, man.
Up to you.
If we were to suppose that, and I think a lot of people have gotten to this, you've had conversations about this recently. If we were to suppose that somebody's traumatic events, probably that are replicated by the show Twin Peaks, probably stuff that we've seen involving, like, you know, incestuous rape and things like this. If somebody's trauma, if somebody's trauma is the catalyst to spark the creation of a place called Twin Peaks that's used initially as sort of an imagination experiment that gets them away from moments of trauma, that then goes into the personal unconscious, that then goes on to have its own like autonomous characters in the way that your daydreams do, right? You start thinking about something, you're just about to fall asleep, the thing itself starts to take over, and all of a sudden you're a captive. You're captive to this thing. You're not in charge anymore. If that's what all of that represented, then we've got the face of trauma and we've got the defense mechanism. Initially, do I believe it starts off as sort of like a guilt or an aggressive or possibly a death revenge dream? Yes, I do. I think initially it's like, when I'm gone, this is what should have happened. You know, this is why everybody is so broken apart when one person in an entire community dies. But by the end of it, what we're looking at the true face of individuation, which is something I could talk about forever, dude. But it's like, I don't believe that Laura is screaming because she's Laura and because she's recognizing that she's Laura. And she's been sent to some, like, you know, Star Trek Deep Space Nine extra dimension where I don't believe that. I believe that she's in a closer level of consciousness where she's coming face to face, even with the concept that she's repressed the place that she used to be the place that she would go to get away from this trauma. She's going to repress the fact that she's got trauma, that she's also going to have to repress the place that she used to get away from her trauma, to be an adult and go on with life. I think a new oncoming train of trauma is about to hit. I think that's what the return is about. And I think the moment that it does hit, it ends with her shooting somebody. And I think that at that moment, the fugue is created and it comes closer to her actual consciousness. I think that she's about to have to deal with, this is the concepts I invented to get away from my trauma. This is my real trauma. This is the real things that have happened to me that led me to this moment in my life. And she's screaming, not because she's really Laura. She's screaming because to even be face to face with this construct that she developed to get away from trauma, she knows she's not real. She screams, and the actual dreamer obtains some level of self. That means that the hard work is ready to be done, right? Now this person has gone, okay, look, I admit it. The moment in my life that I'm at right now has happened in a cyclical fashion because of the bad things that happened to me. I get it. I've been upset with my mother for not having done anything, and I've lambasted her as the great mother, the evil side, like Jung speaks about, and he does at length. I realize that, the evil that men do doesn't necessarily absolve my father's actions, and I haven't been able to deal with that. I admit that I went on to live a life that was informed by that. I admit I was in a bad marriage or relationship. I admit that I just killed that guy over there, which I think is exactly what happens. And I think that it's not by any accident whatsoever that's when Cooper shows up into this new level of consciousness to her. And then I think that the hard work has to happen. But what becomes of the defense mechanism, which you still need in your life? What becomes of how we represent trauma to ourselves from the collective unconscious? What happens to those things? Well, they wait. They wait, and they are probably necessary to our life again. They're doomed to repeat this. So from a narrative perspective, it's true within inside of that layer of the personal unconscious where the show Twin Peaks exists and the world Twin Peaks exists as a real place. And then the layer that's right atop of that, where neither one of those things necessarily exists, it still exists because trauma and defense mechanisms are still within inside of you to be deployed yet again. Right? I hope that any of that makes sense.
You did a good job, and you kept on time. And I think there's a lot that you have said today that opens doors and windows and invites people to want to spend more time.
It may just be an open window completely.
Thinking and to spend more time thinking and listening and possibly joining in on this conversation. Before I have to run, first let me say thank you. Second, can you tell me anything about the podcast idea that you're working on, or the actual, I don't know, the timeline, your wife's name, etc.?
Well, I would love to tell you more about the podcast. The problem is, look, number one, no one's beating our door down, respectively, to have a podcast, right? I'm doing this advertisement. I'm starting to create this advertisement where we'll launch our YouTube channel. And one of the very first things I said is just in time to capture that illustrious 8 years too late market. And that's perfect, right? Because it's, no, it's knocking down our door to go like, well, what's your ideas on the fine Laura theory? And, so it's still coming together. Now, if I'm right, here's my framework, dude. If I'm right, we'll go into an episode. It's not an episode recap show, and I want to be clear about that. So, one episode may be a character. One episode may be, this is the way I see this story arc. One episode might be focused just on one episode. But we are going to go, we're going to watch the program, write a bunch of questions down, seek out concepts of Jungian works to see whether or not we can line that up, then record the podcast. It should be fairly uniform. My wife, whose name is Heather, who's a incredible artist, she paints for a living. And I write songs and produce music for a living, and that is how we make our living.
Now, if you want, you could lean to the left, but you don't have to. Give us a little peek.
Yeah. The other left. So
cool.
This is
all right.
Sort of the beginning of the what will end up becoming the thumbnail, end up becoming sort of the face of the show itself. And then, like I said before, like the first time we talked, at some point, I do still have the aspiration, at least, for this program to then become a video series down the road. I'm aware it may become a video series that plucks the audio from the actual show itself, that kind of thing. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I just, I'm just in love with I'm in love with the content that people like you have created. I'm the guy on this side of the screen. I have been for a very, very long time, right? I have my favorites. I have the places I like to go. I particularly have always been interested in what you've done because you ask questions that allow for people to elaborate in ways that are great. So I want to get it right. By getting it right, I just want to work hard to do it. There's no right, but I think that, look, when you look at things like the Blue Rose Task Force, when you deal with media like that, there's a very researched, very hardworking person who is delivering content to you. And I think it's so great. That's what I want to do. I want to be, because I know a lot of people don't like it when you thrust a framework over the top of Twin Peaks and you go, this is my theory, this is my concept. I want to be careful when I say this is my theory and concept. It is, and I do have a specific an angle that I'm going to approach the podcast from. But at any time, it could collapse. And if that happens, that's wonderful. That it gives me an opportunity to rewatch with fresh eyes the show again. That's the worst that can happen, right?
I'm looking I'm trying to find something that John Bernardi wrote to me. I can't find the exact quote.
I am such a
But
fan.
it was something like "jump on in." That was his words to you. And
I'm such
he was
a fan of his
he was very encouraging for you to pursue.
His program is so full of information. He's so enduring. He's such a real person. When you listen, if anybody who's not listening to his program, listen to his program. It's so informative. It's so inquisitive, right? Sometimes the things that I love the very most, which is how I stumbled on to your content, is people asking questions and not necessarily answering them. I'm looking for answers, and I'm going to attempt to throw answers over the top of something when I find them, but it's still just a question, right? So yeah, and I've really been astonished by how encouraging, how accessible from one end. I don't know if I want to say that to people and then everybody blows you up, but how accessible you are, and encouraging that you guys are, and that's been real cool for me because I've certainly gotten a lot of years worth of entertainment from the other side of this screen from you guys. So no plan, no definitive date to give you. That was the answer to that question.
That's cool.
That you asked minutes and minutes ago. No definitive date yet to give you, but something is coming. There's something it's getting there soon. We're not going to wait forever, brother.
And if anybody wants to weigh in on anything that they heard or anything that you said today, I'll have this available for commenting and whatnot. And if somebody wanted to contact you, they could go through me, or
here's what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, dude. Like, when the show's ready to launch, I'll probably put up a couple of episodes at the same time, so I'll give you something to really like dig into and look at, or listen to rather. So I'll probably hit the RSS feeds and the whatnot with like 3 episodes, perhaps. When I do that, perhaps you and I could get together and have a conversation about what those initial programs are. I'd like to talk about it more with you if you'd like to do that. Then I can sort of point them towards something.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Okay, cool.
I have to run the essay notes that you shared with me. I have read 3 sentences from those notes, and I'll keep the rest of it to myself, unless you wanted me to post that. But you could tell me that later. I assume that'll be something. Later.
Yeah, I wouldn't post it yet, but I've got so much of that. That's free form. That's free associative. Just boom. Just
Nice to see you. And
likewise, brother.
Say hello to your wife, Heather, and
I will do.
Wish you guys the best. Enjoy the process and life in general in the meantime. And I'll catch you next time. Yeah,
dude. I'll let you know as soon as we've recorded some programs, and hopefully we'll get together then.
Take it easy.
All right, dude. Later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yes.
FBI.